Hello. Today's story is Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco, who is a Romanian-born French playwright mainly. The story that we're reading today is the same as the play, but it's a story. So Ionesco used to write stories based on his plays and plays based on his stories. He used to do this kind of migrating from one genre to the other. So the play is from 1959, so the story must be around that kind of time as well. It was published in the Kölner's Photograph and Other Stories in 1967, so 50s, 60s. Before I read you the story, I just wanted to say it's really interesting. Earlier today I was asked, why do you do this? Why do you read stories aloud? It's a good excuse to tell you a little bit about styles of reading. I read aloud because if I'm going to read a story, if I have to read this story to prepare for one of my sessions, for instance, I might as well share it. Might as well read it with other people, and that's part of my style. For me, reading is okay. It's an individual, private activity. You just sit down and read your book to yourself, but it's also of great value as a shared activity. So for me, sharing with other people is an important part of reading. And also because I am a fidgety reader, I love reading, but I find it very difficult to sit still for a very long time. I'm sure a lot of you will be surprised given my line of work, but I tend to go from one thing to the other and sort of multitask and do many things at the same time. So I find it a challenge to sit down for a long period of time and concentrate. So reading aloud, sharing with other people, allows me to enjoy a text socially, with a sense of community, and also it allows me to focus on the text for the time that it takes me to read. There's a confession. So it's just a way of saying that we all read differently. We all have different reading styles. We all have different attention spans, and it is all fine. All of them are okay. All you have to do is understand how you read, when you read, what you read, who you read with, and just go with what's best for you. Okay, Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco. We were sitting outside the cafe, my friend Jeanne and I, peacefully talking about one thing and another, when we caught sight of it on the opposite pavement, huge and powerful, panting noisily, charging straight ahead and brushing against market stalls, a rhinoceros. People in the street stepped hurriedly aside to let it pass. A housewife uttered a cry of terror. Her basket dropped from her hands, the wine from a broken bottle spread over the pavement, and some pedestrians, one of them an elderly man, rushed into the shops. It was all over like a flash of lightning. People emerged from their hiding places and gathered in groups which watched the rhinoceros disappear into the distance, made some comments on the incident, and then dispersed. My own reactions are slowish. I absent-mindedly took in the image of the rushing beast without ascribing any very great importance to it. That morning, however, I was feeling tired and my mouth was sour as a result of the previous night's excesses. We had been celebrating a friend's birthday. Jean had not been at the party, and when the first comment of surprise was over, he exclaimed, "A rhinoceros at large in town! Doesn't that surprise you? It ought not to be allowed." "True," I said. "I hadn't thought of that. It's dangerous." "We ought to protest to the town council." "Perhaps it's escaped from the zoo," I said. "You're dreaming," he replied. "There hasn't been a zoo in our town since the animals were decimated by the plague in the 17th century. Perhaps it belongs to the circus?" What circus? The council has forbidden itinerant entertainers to stop on municipal territory. None have come here since we were children. Perhaps it has lived here ever since, hidden in the marshy woods round about, I answered with a yawn. You're completely lost in a dense alcoholic haze, which rises from the stomach. Yes, and has pervaded your brain. What marshy woods can you think of round about here? Our province is so arid they call it Little Castile. Perhaps it's sheltered under a pebble? Perhaps it made its nest on a dry branch? How tiresome you are with your paradoxes. You're quite incapable of talking seriously. Today particularly. Today and every other day. Don't lose your temper, my dear Jeanne. We're not going to quarrel about that creature. We changed the subject of our conversation and began to talk about the weather again, about the rain which fell so rarely in our region, about the need to provide our sky with artificial clouds, and other banal and insoluble questions. We parted. It was Sunday. I went to bed and slept all day. Another wasted Sunday. On Monday morning, I went to the office, making a solemn promise to myself never to get drunk again, and particularly not on Saturdays, so as not to spoil the following Sundays. For I had one single free day a week and 3 weeks' holiday in the summer. Instead of drinking and making myself ill, wouldn't it be better to keep fit and healthy, to spend my precious moments of freedom in a more intelligent fashion? Visiting museums, reading literary magazines, and listening to lectures? And instead of spending all my available money on drink, wouldn't it be preferable to buy tickets for interesting plays? I was still unfamiliar with the avant-garde theatre, of which I had heard so much talk. I had never seen a play by Ionesco. Now or never was the time to bring myself up to date. The following Sunday, I met Jeanne once again at the same cafe. I've kept my promise, I said, shaking hands with him. What promise have you kept? He asked. My promise to myself. I vowed to give up drinking. Instead of drinking, I've decided to cultivate my mind. Today, I am clear-headed. This afternoon, I'm going to the Municipal Museum, and this evening, I've a ticket for the theatre. Won't you come with me? Let's hope your good intentions will last, replied Jeanne. But I can't go with you. I'm meeting some friends at the brasserie. Oh, my dear fellow, now it's you who are setting a bad example. You'll get drunk. Once in a way doesn't imply a habit, replied Jeanne irritably. Whereas you... The discussion was about to take a disagreeable turn when we heard a mighty trumpeting, the horrid clatter of some perissodactyl's hoofs, cries, a cat's mewing. Almost simultaneously we saw a rhinoceros appear, then disappear on the opposite pavement, panting noisily and charging straight ahead. Immediately afterwards, a woman appeared holding in her arms a shapeless, blood-stained little object. It's run over my cat, she wailed. It's run over my cat. The poor, dishevelled woman, who seemed the very embodiment of grief, was soon surrounded by people offering sympathy. Jeanne and I got up. We rushed across the street to the side of the unfortunate woman. All cats are mortal, I said stupidly, not knowing how to console her. It came past my shop last week, the grocer recalled. It wasn't the same one, Jeanne declared. It wasn't the same one. Last week's had 2 horns on its nose. It was an Asian rhinoceros. This one had only 1. It's an African rhinoceros. You're talking nonsense, I said irritably. How could you distinguish its horns? The animal rushed past so fast that we could hardly see it. You hadn't time to count them. I don't live in a haze, Jeanne retorted sharply. I'm clear-headed. I'm quick at figures. He was charging with his head down. That made it all the easier to see. You're a pretentious fellow, Jean. You're a pedant who isn't even sure of his own knowledge. For in the first place, it's the Asian rhinoceros that has one horn on its nose, and the African rhinoceros has two. You're quite wrong. It's the other way round. Would you like to bet on it? I won't bet against you. You're the one who has two horns, he cried, red with fury. You, Asiatic you. He stuck to his guns. I haven't any horns. I shall never wear them. And I'm not an Asiatic either. In any case, Asiatics are just like other people. They're yellow, he shouted, beside himself with rage. Jean turned his back on me and strode off, cursing. I felt a fool. I ought to have been more conciliatory and not contradicted him, for I knew he could not bear it. The slightest objection made him foam at the mouth. This was his only fault, for he had a heart of gold and had done me countless good turns. The few people who were there, and who had been listening to us, had as a result quite forgotten about the poor woman's squashed cat. They crowded round me, arguing. Some maintained that the Asian rhinoceros was indeed one-horned, and that I was right. Others maintained that, on the contrary, the African rhinoceros was one-horned, and that therefore the previous speaker had been right. That is not the question, interposed a gentleman, straw boater, small moustache, eyeglass, a typical logician's head, who had hitherto stood silent. The discussion turned on a problem from which you have wondered. You began by asking yourselves whether today's rhinoceros is the same as last Sunday's, or whether it is a different one. That is what must be decided. You may have seen one and the same one-horned rhinoceros on two occasions, or you may have seen one and the same two-horned rhinoceros on two occasions. Or again, you may have seen first one-horned rhinoceros and then a second one-horned rhinoceros, or else first one two-horned rhinoceros and then a second two-horned rhinoceros. If on the first occasion you had seen a two-horned rhinoceros and on the second a one-horned rhinoceros, that would not be conclusive either. It might be that since last week the rhinoceros had lost one of his horns and that the one you saw today was the same. Or it might be that the two-horned rhinoceroses had each lost one of their horns. If you could prove that on the first occasion you had seen a one-horned rhinoceros, whether it was Asian or African, and today a two-horned rhinoceros, whether it was African or Asian, that doesn't matter, then we might conclude that the two different rhinoceroses were involved. For it is more unlikely that a second horn could grow in a few days to any visible extent on a rhinoceros's nose. This would mean that an Asian or African rhinoceros had become an African or Asian rhinoceros, which is logically impossible, since the same creature cannot be born in two places at once or even successively. That seems clear to me, I said, but it doesn't settle the question. Of course, retorted the gentleman, smiling with a knowledgeable air. Only the problem has now been stated correctly. That's not the problem either, interrupted the grocer, who was, being no doubt of an emotional nature, cared little about logic. Can we allow our cats to be run over under our eyes by two-horned or one-horned rhinoceroses, be they Asian or African? He's right, everybody exclaimed. We can't allow our cats to be run over by rhinoceroses or anything else. The grocer pointed with a theatrical gesture to the poor weeping woman who still held and rocked in her arms the shapeless, bleeding remains of what had once been her cat. Next day, in the paper, under the heading Road Casualties Among Cats, there were 2 lines describing the death of the poor creature. Crushed underfoot by a pachyderm, it was said, without further details. On Sunday afternoon, I hadn't visited a museum. In the evening, I hadn't gone to the theatre. I had moped at home by myself, overwhelmed by remorse at having quarrelled with Jeanne. He's so susceptible. I ought to have spared his feelings, I told myself. It's absurd to lose one's temper about something like that, about the horns of a rhinoceros that one had never seen before, a native of Africa or of India, such faraway countries. What could it matter to me? Whereas Jeanne had always been my friend, a friend to whom I owed so much, and who, in short, while promising myself to go and see Jeanne as soon as possible and to make it up with him, I had drunk an entire bottle of brandy without noticing. But I did indeed notice it the next day. A sore head, a foul mouth, an uneasy conscience. I was really most uncomfortable, but duty before everything. I got to the office on time, or almost. I was able to sign the register just before it was taken away. "Well, so you've seen rhinoceroses too?" asked the chief clerk, who, to my great surprise, was already there. "Sure, I've seen him," I said, taking off my town jacket and putting my old jacket with the frayed sleeves good enough for work. "Oh, now you see I'm not crazy," exclaimed the typist Daisy excitedly. How pretty she was, with her pink cheeks and fair hair. I found her terribly attractive. If I could fall in love with anybody, it would be with her. "A one-horned rhinoceros." "Two-horned," corrected my colleague Émile Dudard, Bachelor of Law, eminent jurist, who looked forward to a brilliant future with the firm and possibly in Daisy's affection. "I've not seen it, and I don't believe in it," declared Botard, and an ex-schoolmaster who acted as archivist. "And nobody's ever seen one in this part of the world except in the illustrations to school textbooks. These rhinoceroses have blossomed only in the imagination of ignorant women. The thing's a myth, like flying saucers." I was about to point out to Botard that the expression blossomed applied to a rhinoceros or to a number of them seemed to me inappropriate, when the jurist exclaimed, "All the same, a cat was crushed, and before witnesses." "Collective psychosis," retorted Botard, who was a free thinker. "Just like religion, the opium of the people." "I believe in flying saucers myself," remarked Daisy. The chief clerk cut short our argument. "That'll do. Enough chatter. Rhinoceros or no rhinoceros? Flying saucers or no flying saucers? Work's got to be done." The typist started typing. I sat down at my desk and became engrossed in my documents. Émile Dudard began correcting the proofs of a commentary on the law for the repression of alcoholism, while the chief clerk, slamming the door, retired into his study. "It's a hoax," Botard grumbled once more, aiming his remarks at Dudard. "It's your propaganda that spreads these rumours." "It's not propaganda," I interposed. "I saw it myself," Daisy confirmed simultaneously. "You make me laugh," said Dudard to Botard. "Propaganda for what?" "You know that better than I do. Don't act the simpleton. In any case, I'm not paid by the Pontenegrins." "That's an insult," cried Botard, thumping the table with his fist. The door of the chief clerk's room opened suddenly, and his head appeared. Monsieur Boeuf hasn't come in today." "Quite true. He's not here," I said. "Just when I needed him. Did he tell anyone he was ill? If this goes on, I shall give him the sack." It was not the first time that the chief clerk had threatened our colleagues in this way. "Has one of you got the key to his desk?" he went on. Just then, Madame Boeuf made her appearance. She seemed terrified. "I must ask you to excuse my husband. He went to spend the weekend with relations. He's had a slight attack of flu. Look, that's what he says in his telegram. He hopes to be back on Wednesday. Give me a glass of water and a chair, she gasped, collapsing onto the chair we offered her. It's very tiresome, but it's no reason to get so alarmed, remarked the chief clerk. I was pursued by a rhinoceros all the way from home, she stammered. With one horn or two? I asked. You make me laugh, exclaimed Butard. Why don't you let her speak? Protested Doudard. Madame Boeuf had to make a great effort to be explicit. It's downstairs, in the doorway. It seems to be trying to come upstairs. At that very moment, a tremendous noise was heard. The stairs were undoubtedly giving way under a considerable weight. We rushed out onto the landing, and there, in fact, amidst the debris, was a rhinoceros, its head lowered, trumpeting in an agonized and agonizing voice, and turning vainly round and round. I was able to make out 2 horns. It's an African rhinoceros, I said, or rather an Asian one. My mind was so confused that I was no longer sure whether 2 horns were characteristic of the Asian or of the African rhinoceros, whether a single horn was characteristic of the African or of the Asian rhinoceros, or whether, on the contrary, 2 horns. In short, I was floundering mentally, while Butard glanced furiously at Doudard. It's an infamous plot, and with an orator's gesture he pointed at the jurist. It's your fault. It's yours, the other retorted. Keep calm. This is no time to quarrel, declared Daisy, trying in vain to pacify him. For years now, I've been asking the board to let us have concrete steps instead of that rickety old staircase, said the chief clerk. Something like this was bound to happen. It was predictable. I was quite right. As usual, Daisy added ironically, but how shall we get down? I'll carry you in my arms, the chief clerk joked flirtatiously, stroking the typist's cheek, and we'll jump together. Don't put your horny hand on my face, you pachydermous creature. The chief clerk had not time to react. Madame Boeuf, who had got up and come to join us, and who had for some minutes been staring attentively at the rhinoceros, which was turning round and round below us, suddenly uttered a terrible cry. It's my husband! Boeuf! My poor dear Boeuf! What has happened to you? The rhinoceros, or rather Boeuf, responded with an insolent and yet tender trumpeting, while Madame Boeuf fainted into my arms, and Butard, raising his to heaven, stormed. It's sheer lunacy. What a society! When we had recovered from our initial astonishment, we telephoned to the fire brigade, who drove up with their ladders and fetched us down. Madame Boeuf, although we advised against it, rode off on her spouse's back towards their home. She had ample grounds for divorce, but who was the guilty party? Yet she chose rather not to desert her husband in his present state. At the little bistro, where we all went for lunch, all except the Boeufs, of course, we learned that several rhinoceroses had been seen in various parts of the town. Some people said 7, others 17, others again said 32. In face of this accumulated evidence, Butard could no longer deny the rhinoceric facts. But he knew, he declared, what to think about it. He would explain it to us some day. He knew the why of things, the underside of the story, the names of those responsible, the aim and significance of the outrage. Going back to the office that afternoon, business or no business, was out of the question. We had to wait for the staircase to be repaired. I took advantage of this to pay a call on Jean, with the intention of making it up with him. He was in bed. I don't feel very well, he said. You know, Jean, We were both right. There are 2 horned rhinoceroses in the town as well as 1 horned ones. It really doesn't matter where either sort comes from. The only significant thing, in my opinion, is the existence of the rhinoceros in itself. I don't feel very well, my friend kept on saying without listening to me. I don't feel very well. What's the matter with you? I'm so sorry. I'm rather feverish, and my head aches. More precisely, it was his forehead which was aching. He must have had a knock, he said, and in fact, a lump was swelling up there, just above his nose. He had gone a greenish colour, and his voice was hoarse. Have you got a sore throat? It may be tonsillitis. I took his pulse. It was beating quite regularly. It can't be very serious. A few days' rest, and you'll be all right. Have you sent for the doctor? As I was about to let go of his wrist, I noticed that his veins were swollen and bulging out. Looking closely, I observed that not only were the veins enlarged, but that the skin all round them was visibly changing colour and growing hard. It may be more serious than I imagined, I thought. We must send for the doctor, I said aloud. I felt uncomfortable in my clothes, and now my pyjamas are too tight, he said in a hoarse voice. What's the matter with your skin? It's like leather. Then, staring at him, do you know what happened to Buff? He's turned into a rhinoceros. Well, what about it? That's not such a bad thing. After all, rhinoceroses are creatures like ourselves, with just as much right to live. Provided they don't imperil their own lives. Aren't you aware of the difference in mentality? Do you think ours is preferable? All the same, we have our own moral code, which I consider incompatible with that of these animals. We have our philosophy, our irreplaceable system of values. Humanism is out of date. You're a ridiculous old sentimentalist. You're talking nonsense. I'm surprised to hear you say that, my dear Jeanne. Have you taken leave of your senses? It really looked like it. Blind fury had disfigured his face and altered his voice to such an extent that I could scarcely understand the words that issued from his lips. Such assertions coming from you, I tried to resume. He did not give me a chance to do so. He flung back his blankets, tore off his pyjamas, and stood up in bed, entirely naked. He who was usually the most modest of men, green with rage from head to foot. The lump on his forehead had grown longer. He was staring fixedly at me, apparently without seeing me. Or rather, he must have seen me quite clearly, for he charged at me with his head lowered. I barely had time to leap to one side. If I hadn't, he would have pinned me to the wall. "You're a rhinoceros!" I cried. "I'll trample on you. I'll trample on you." I made out these words as I dashed towards the door. I went downstairs 4 steps at a time, while the walls shook as he butted them with his horn, and I heard him utter fearful, angry trumpetings. "Call the police! Call the police! You've got a rhinoceros in the house!" I called out to the tenants, who, in great surprise, looked out for their flats as I passed each landing. On the ground floor, I had great difficulty in dodging the rhinoceros which emerged from the concierge's lodge and tried to charge me. At last I found myself out in the street, sweating, my legs limp, at the end of my tether. Fortunately, there was a bench by the edge of the pavement, and I sat down on it. Scarcely had I more or less got back my breath when I saw a herd of rhinoceroses hurrying down the avenue and nearing at full speed the place where I was. If only they had been content to stay in the middle of the street, but there were so many that there was not room for them all there, and they overflowed onto the pavement. I leapt off my bench and flattened myself against the wall. Snorting, Trumpeting, with the smell of leather and of wild animals and heat, they brushed past me and covered me with a cloud of dust. When they had disappeared, I could not go back to sit on the bench. The animals had demolished it, and it lay in fragments on the pavement. I did not find it easy to recover from such emotions. I had to stay at home for several days. Daisy came to see me and kept me informed as to the changes that were taking place. The chief clerk had been the first to turn into a rhinoceros, to the great disgust of Bernard, who nevertheless became one himself 24 hours later. "One must keep up with one's times," were his last words as a man. The case of Bernard did not surprise me, in spite of his apparent strength of mind. I found it less easy to understand the chief clerk's transformation. Of course, it might have been involuntary, but one would have expected him to put up more resistance. Daisy recalled that she had commented on the roughness of his palms the very day that Beuve had appeared in rhinoceros shape. This must have made a deep impression on him. He had not shown it, but he had certainly been cut to the quick. If I hadn't been so outspoken, if I had pointed it out to him more tactfully, perhaps this would never have happened. I blame myself too for not having been gentler with Jeanne. I ought to have been friendlier, shown more understanding, I said in my turn. Daisy informed me that Dudard too had been transformed, as had also a cousin of hers whom I did not know. And there were others, mutual friends, strangers. "There are a great many of them," she said, "about a quarter of the inhabitants of our town. They're still in the minority, however. The way things are going, that won't last for long," she sighed. "Alas, and they're so much more efficient." Herds of rhinoceroses rushing at top speed through the streets became a sight that no longer surprised anybody. People would stand aside to let them pass and then resume their stroll or attend to their business as if nothing had happened. "How can anybody be a rhinoceros? It's unthinkable," I protested in vain. More of them kept emerging from courtyards and houses, even from windows, and went to join the rest. There came a point when the authorities proposed to enclose them in huge parks. For humanitarian reasons, the Society for the Protection of Animals opposed this. Besides, everyone had some close relative or friend among the rhinoceroses, which, for obvious reasons, made the project well nigh impracticable. It was abandoned. The situation grew worse, which was only to be expected. One day, a whole regiment of rhinoceroses, having knocked down the walls of the barracks, came out with drums at their head and poured out onto the boulevards. At the Ministry of Statistics, statisticians produced their statistics. Census of animals, approximate reckoning of their daily increase, percentage of those with one horn, percentage of those with two. What an opportunity for learned controversies. Soon, there were defections among the statisticians themselves. The few who remained were paid fantastic sums. One day, from my balcony, I caught sight of a rhinoceros charging forward with loud trumpetings, presumably to join his fellows. He wore a straw boater impaled on his horn. "The logician!" I cried. "He's one too? Is it possible?" Just at that moment, Daisy opened the door. "The logician is a rhinoceros," I told her. She knew. She had just seen him in the street. She was bringing me a basket of provisions. "Shall we have lunch together?" she suggested. "You know, it was difficult to find anything to eat. The shops have been ransacked. They devour everything. A number of shops are closed on account of transformations, the notices say." "I love you, Daisy. Please never leave me." "Close the window, darling. They make so much noise, and the dust comes in." "So long as we're together, I'm afraid of nothing. I don't mind about anything." Then, when I had closed the window, I thought I should never be able to fall in love with a woman again. I clasped her tightly in my arms. She responded to my embrace. How I'd like to make you happy. Could you be happy with me? Why not? You declare you're afraid of nothing, and yet you're scared of everything. What can happen to us? My love, my joy, I stammered, kissing her lips with a passion such as I had forgotten, intense and agonizing. The ringing of the telephone interrupted us. She broke from my arms, went to pick up the receiver, then uttered a cry. Listen! I put the receiver to my ear. I heard ferocious trumpetings. They're playing tricks on us. Whatever can be happening? She inquired in alarm. We turned on the radio to hear the news. We heard more trumpetings. She was shaking with fear. Keep calm, I said. Keep calm. She cried out in terror. They've taken over the broadcasting station. Keep calm, I repeated, increasingly agitated myself. Next day, in the street, they were running about in all directions. You could watch for hours without catching sight of a single human being. Our house was shaking under the weight of our perissodactyl neighbours' hooves. What must be, said Daisy. What can we do about it? They've all gone mad. The world is sick. It's not you and I who'll cure it. We shan't be able to communicate with anybody. Can you understand them? We ought to try to interpret their psychology, to learn their language. They have no language. What do you know about it? Listen to me, Daisy. We shall have children, and then they will have children. It'll take time, but between us we can regenerate humanity with a little courage. I don't want to have children. How do you hope to save the world then? Perhaps, after all, it's we who need saving. Perhaps we are the abnormal ones. Do you see anyone else like us? Daisy, I can't have you talking like that. I looked at her in despair. It's we who are in the right, Daisy, I assure you. What arrogance! There's no absolute right. It's the whole world that's right, not you or me. Yes, Daisy, I am right. The proof is that you understand me and that I love you as much as a man can love a woman. I'm rather ashamed of what you call love, that morbid thing. It cannot compare with the extraordinary energy displayed by all these beings we see around us. Energy? Here's energy for you, I cried, my powers of argument exhausted, giving her a slap. Then, as she burst into tears, I won't give in. No, I won't give in. She rose, weeping, and flung her sweet-smelling arms round my neck. I'll stand fast with you to the end. She was unable to keep her word. She grew melancholy and visibly pined away. One morning, when I woke up, I saw that her place in the bed was empty. She had gone away without leaving any message. The situation became literally unbearable for me. It was my fault if Daisy had gone. Who knows what had become of her? Another burden on my conscience. There was nobody who could help me to find her again. I imagined the worst and felt myself responsible. And on every side there were trumpetings and frenzied chargings and clouds of dust. In vain did I shut myself up in my own room, putting cotton wool in my ears. At night I saw them in my dreams. The only way out is to convince them. But of what? Were these mutations reversible? And in order to convince them, one would have to talk to them. In order for them to relearn my language, which moreover I was beginning to forget, I should first have to learn theirs. I could not distinguish one trumpeting from another, one rhinoceros from another rhinoceros. One day, looking at myself in the glass, I took a dislike to my long face. I needed a horn. or even 2, to give dignity to my flabby features. And what if, as Daisy had said, it was they who were in the right? I was out of date. I had missed the boat, that was clear. I discovered that their trumpetings had after all a certain charm, if a somewhat harsh one. I should have noticed that while there was still time. I tried to trumpet. How feeble the sound was, how lacking in vigour. When I made greater efforts, I only succeeded in howling. Howlings are not trumpetings. It is obvious that one must not always drift blindly behind events, and that it's a good thing to maintain one's individuality. However, one must also make allowances for things, asserting one's own difference, to be sure, but yet remaining akin to one's fellows. I no longer bore any likeness to anyone or to anything except to ancient, old-fashioned photographs which had no connection with living beings. Each morning, I looked at my hands, hoping that the palms would have hardened during my sleep. The skin remained flabby. I gazed at my too white body, my hairy legs. Oh, for a hard skin and that magnificent green colour, a decent, hairless nudity like theirs. My conscience was increasingly uneasy, unhappy. I felt I was a monster. Alas, I would never become a rhinoceros. I could never change. I dared no longer look at myself. I was ashamed, and yet I couldn't. No, I couldn't. Rhinoceros by Eugene, Ionesco. Do let me know what you think, please. And thank you for listening.